Today I am going to be reviewing a poetry debut that makes for an excellent drinking game, in which you take a shot each time you fuck up the name Toby Rivas de las Martinez. Toby Martin de las Riveras. Tomi Raza de las Marinas. Yeah, you get the gist. So as you must have guessed, today we are reviewing Terror by Toby Merengue de las Rivas. By Toby's Rivas de las Tobas. We're going to be reviewing Terror by Toby Gutierrez de las Ramirez. By Toby Caramba de las Cucarachas. By Toby Salsa Tango y Cha-Cha. Terror by Toby Pablo de las Chinchillas. Anyway, Terror by some guy with a Spanish name. Okay, so Terror is kind of like a modern version of T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, with a special interest in A. Judeo-Christian symbology and iconography, and B. the deprived parts of northern England. I say it's like the Wasteland because it's formally really audacious, and because half the time you don't have the slightest clue what the hell he's talking about. Say the truth. Northumberland is Israel. Parts of it prefigured as the Shulamite woman. Who the hell is the Shulamite woman? Not only is it as difficult as the Wasteland, it's also as mercilessly intertextual. Toby Merengue de las Tortillas loves nothing more than slapping you in the face with references to people who are like Reggie in Bad Boys 2.
Nigga, who that is, dog? Reggie! Who the fuck is Reggie?
Indeed, before buying this, you might want to read a couple of encyclopedias, because you need to be familiar with the names he will slap you with, like Bonhoeffer, Blanchot, Robert Westall, Purcell, Nomi, Thomas Sackville, Anne Bradstreet, Nicholas of Flue, Desjardins, Philip Hughes, Primo de Rivera. This is bad enough on its own merits, but it becomes ridiculous when he randomly mentions someone with an incredibly common name. Who the fuck is Johnson? There must be like 20 million people in the world with that name. Give me a break. I remember that one of the people who recommended this book to me most warmly was James Brooks, of whom John Stone had this to say in his review.
There must be such a thing as too much allusion, and I'm not quite convinced of Brooks's need to resort to it at all when he's so good at making plain words sing.
Well, things are beginning to fall into place for me, because that's exactly what I would say about Toby Maracanã del Rio de Janeiro. Thankfully, there are these highly helpful notes at the end of the book. I say this: his offenbarsing manifests less in his rising and our knowledge of it than in the eye's fatal cold calculus. Well, I'll be. I wonder what offenbarsing is. Let's look at the notes. Offenbarsing, revealedness, is a concept particularly associated with the neo-Orthodox Protestant theologian Karl Barth's doctrine of the Trinity. Now, in such a difficult book, it's always a bit risky to say what it's about. However, what I think collates all of these poems is an exceptionally intense anxiety of disintegration. You could almost call it a terror of disintegration. Oh. Okay. I get it. Toby Mango de las Naranjas has a number of overlapping themes, like the body, the state, and the self. But they are presented like a hoodie, a pair of legs, and a skateboard. They are frail, interdependent things that need each other to stay on their feet, and often fail even in that. Considering this poet's breadth of vocabulary, which is amazing, by the way, it's probably significant that the word collapse should appear several times. Grammar is never collapsing until it is finally permitted to do so. The image is at the point of collapse. Neruda's violet is self-collapsing. In fact, I think this collection is really about skateboarding and about Toby Maria de las Paraguas's constant fear of smashing his front teeth onto the concrete. Another word that reappears all over the place is the word body. It's used to refer both to the human body and also to just about anything that has an internal integrity. This is why Toby's poetry discusses the body as image of the state. because the integrity of our individual body is frail and surrounded by fiction in the same measure as that of our society and culture. The same, of course, is true of religion, in which the body of Christ is a violated integrity both in that it was crucified and, simultaneously, in that the integrity of the Christian mythos is fragmentary and uncertain. In the same way that the body of Christ is assumed into our own bodies via the process of communion, so is the equally delicate and essential fiction of the state assumed into our bodies via socio-normative processes. Fuck me, I'm using some tough language here, am I? But the state is also that which employs and if necessary sacrifices our bodies to its own ends, industrial, economic or military. That is why Toby, Ricardo, Cristiano Ronaldo uses phrases like the body as image of the state, violated and violating, and also why he rather frequently likes to draw parallels between characters and figures that would normally be in conflict. This is especially notable in the third part of the book, which has a lot to do with hunting. E.g., in Very Rich Hours, Toby Gonzalez del Flamingo describes the process of fox hunting and ends with these lines. They were listening for their lord, the cry and tread of the master, his reckless overstriding the fences, his will at the bitter end. The heart, the hemmed fox, sustained and broken by its flight. Notice how numerous concepts overlap here. The hunters listening for their lord are really not unlike their own hounds listening for the master, and in this sense are no less the tools of history. Significantly, they are also alike to the fox, which is after all a hunting animal, in their frailty and vulnerability. So the heart that the poem mentions at the end is simultaneously that of the hunters and the fox. It is sustained and broken by its flight because the act of fox hunting mirrors other historical processes to which the hunters themselves are subjected. The violations that we are victims of are directly connected to those we are guilty of. And if conflating victim and culprit sounds like an ethical nightmare, well, it is. And that's why Toby Sábado del Domingo's poetry is so bleak and terrified, because any act of justice is always involved in other acts of injustice, so that even if it looks like you're doing things right, they still come back and smack you in the face. These concerns are original and penetrating, and I don't believe anyone has written about skateboarding so effectively, or whatever the fuck it is that he's writing about. They are also really well executed, with poems that are just as broken down and subtly interconnected to each other as the concepts that they describe. This is exactly what makes them so difficult, but ultimately so incredibly rewarding. And yes, it's true, when terror clicks, this is contemporary poetry at its most brilliant. Now I suppose the problem is that it only clicks at times, like when you buy a new PC and it seems like it works really well, and then you start getting malware messages and it freezes and restarts, and you're like, dude, what the fuck? Terror is composed of 4 parts. The first one is awesome, the second one is awesome, the third one is, alright, I suppose, and the fourth one is downright rubbish. For one thing, in part 4 there are a few poems featuring foreign cultures, and Toby seems only too happy to represent them by means of stereotype and cliché. In a poem about Patricia Beer, who lived in Italy, he describes her thus. Her calves and sheer silk still a girl's, her polished tan half heel set against them. Magnificent. That Italian air, the strict bob ordering her face. Okay, what on earth is an Italian air supposed to be? I know it's meant as a compliment, but when you say that Italian air, like we're all supposed to already know what you're talking about, then what you're doing is appealing to a cliché. Like you can recognize an Italian because he's got a moustache, plays a mandolin, and eats pizza. Foreign nationalities don't have special airs about them any more than ethnicities or sexual orientations do. His poems in Spain are not quite as indelicate, but setting them in a tourist hotspot like Cordoba seems, I don't know, a bit incongruous? I mean, if I were a French poet and I wrote a whole collection themed around the forgotten and impoverished suburbs of southern France, and then I included a sequence of poems representing life in England, surely I could do better than setting them in Canterbury, if you see what I mean. As importantly, the fourth part is supposed to provide some kind of resolution to the problems he poses in the first half of the collection. We're expecting something especially ambitious because it is repeatedly established that language and the arts are not sufficient as a response. See lines like these: futility of representation, of image, cherubic shepherd. Reimagine all the bitter works of redemption as cheap aesthetic, historical suffering assuaged as literary trope. Nor do I see what authority this disclosure holds in nature, beyond a plaintive and facile catharsis. Then after setting this up, the collection practically closes on 3 poems about Patricia Beer, Faye Pomeranz, and Jack Clemo, respectively a poet, an artist, and another poet. Okay, I thought you just said something about works of redemption being cheap aesthetic, representation being futile, and catharsis being facile. So why the fuck are these 3 people suddenly so important? And what's the alternative? A xenophiliac escape fantasy where we leave behind the poverties of northern England by going on holiday to Spain? In the very final lyric there's an attempt at something like an epiphany, but this falls completely flat, partly because the philosophy mirrors T.S. Eliot a bit too closely now, and partly because part 4 is just such an incredibly disappointing conclusion to what is otherwise such a wonderful collection. Does it spoil the whole experience, like when the edge of a cookie breaks and you lose the entire thing? No, it's not that bad. But it's like watching E.T. and taking away the happy ending. It's still a great film, but without some kind of resolution, it just becomes a really bleak and grim exploration of everything that's worse about mankind. Terror is still worth reading. It's got compassion, intelligence, and sometimes exceptional lyricism. But philosophically it comes very short of its ambitions, and it's got nothing to offer its reader other than the nihilistic statement that all skateboarders will smash their asses off.